Hello, I'm Evan with New Life for Old Bikes. In today's episode, we're going to rebuild a three-piece bottom bracket, or crank, on our project mountain bike. This particular mountain bike has spent a large portion of its life outside, and you can see by the surface rust. This particular bottom bracket is stuck. What I'm hoping to find is that the bearings have just simply locked up. In order to pull the crank arm and chain ring off this side of the bike and the crank on the other, we're going to need a crank puller. This is specific to this type of job. We'll also need on this particular one a 16 millimeter wrench, and we'll need a screwdriver to pull the dust cover off. Simply insert the screwdriver behind the dust cover and pop it off. Underneath the dust cover, you're going to find a 14 or a 15 millimeter bolt. The first thing we're going to do is spray this down with some penetrating oil. Next, we're going to take our 15 millimeter wrench and we're going to break it loose. I'm actually surprised it came off that easy, considering how rusty it was. Once we've removed the nut, we're going to thread our crank puller in as far as it will go and snug it up. Next, I'm going to tighten the puller. I'm using a crescent wrench simply because it's larger and I can get more leverage. There we go. It's off. The other side of this bike was missing the dust cap and was exposed to the elements, even worse than the other side. I've sprayed it down with some penetrating oil, and we're going to see if we can't break this one loose. I've unscrewed the center section. Again, screw that in as tight as you can and snug the tool up. Next, tighten your tool to remove the crank arm. There we go. Other side is off. Next, we're going to spray a little penetrating oil on the lock ring. And we have two choices here. I could put a screwdriver and use a hammer to tap it loose, or I've got a special tool for this, which makes life a little bit easier for me, and simply turn it and break it loose. Then we're taking a crescent wrench and breaking loose. Oh my goodness. Maybe we're going to let this one sit for a little while and come back to it. After letting this sit for an hour or so, we're going to see how easy it is to take it apart. My goodness, what a difference. I think we're going to need a new set of bearings. I would say that's our problem right there. This is the bearing cup on the drive side of the bike. When we took out the bearings, they were not only rusty, but they had come out of the race. So I'm going to remove this and replace it as well. Before I do that, however, I'm going to spray it down with some penetrating oil. Fortunately, I can get in behind this one. There we go. After letting the drive side bearing cup soak for several hours, I'm still unable to get it off. So, what I'm going to do is clean up the inside of the bearing cup and see what condition it's in. My other option, if this turns out to be bad, will be to take my Dremel tool and a cutoff wheel and remove the old bearing cup. I'd rather not do that. After spending 15 minutes or so cleaning the inside of the drive side bearing cup with a wire brush and some mineral spirits, I'm happy to report it's pit-free. So we'll be able to use this. I was amazed just how good it looked. Next, we're going to do a little bit of cleaning just so everything looks good when it's put back together. It's time for reassembly. The first thing we're going to do is wipe a thin layer of grease on the drive side bearing cup. This doesn't have to be a huge amount because inside of the bearings, if you'll notice, is a cavity, and we're going to fill that up with grease. Make sure you force it into that cavity and fill it up. There we go. Next, we're going to grease the inside of the non-drive side bearing cup. And again, we're going to make sure we fill that cavity inside the bearing with plenty of grease. And we're just going to drop that into the bearing cup. The last thing we're going to do is take the crank, which is called a spindle, and we're going to grease it. One side of the spindle is longer than the other. We need to make sure that we put the long end into the bicycle so that it comes out on the drive side. All right, very good. Make sure it rolls smoothly. We don't want it loose, but we also don't want it to bind. The next thing I'm going to do is reinstall the non-drive side crank arm. As I tighten the nut onto the spindle, it will pull the crank arm tight. Next, we're going to put on the dust cap to protect the threads. Although this might seem obvious, there are two things you need to remember when doing the drive side crank arm and chain ring. First is pull the chain around the spindle. Second, you want to make sure that the crank arm is going the opposite direction of the one on the other side. Again, it might seem obvious, but I know people that have made that mistake. Last thing, pull the chain onto the chain ring. And don't forget, reinstall the dust cap. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget, like and subscribe.